It is that time of year again where your YouTube recommendations are swarmed with lists of things that the people you watch enjoy. And wait a minute, that's me. Look, I play a lot of games every year. Not everything, but definitely what I would say is more than the average person. And in that, I have a lot to say about them. 2025 has been a pretty interesting one for sure, after the absolute madness of 2023 and what seemed like a relatively tame 2024 in comparison. The industry was definitely back in full swing this year, with some incredible games that were definitely expected, and some of the most insane out-of-nowhere bangers I think we've ever seen from some of the most unexpected parts of the industry. Regardless, I've played a lot of really excellent stuff over the past 12 months, and I am excited to tell you about it, but let me just lay down some ground rules first so you know what to expect. The first 8 games on this list will be in no particular order, followed by my top 5 for the year, which I don't have to explain to you what that means. Anyway, enough yapping, let's get into it. If you know me, you'll know that I am one of those weird people that probably likes Monster Hunter a little bit too much. And if you know anything about Monster Hunter, you'll probably understand exactly why I'll say that even though Monster Hunter Wilds didn't quite live up to the immeasurable hype following Monster Hunter World, that doesn't mean that it isn't still damn good. As with every Monster Hunter game before it, it has a great monster roster, in my opinion, one of the strongest launch rosters of any base Monster Hunter game I've played, with an excellent level of variety that extended beyond World's fixed archetypes. Couple that with the best feeling combat in any Monster Hunter game to date, and regardless of some minor shortcomings regarding balance and longevity, and some performance issues at launch that seem to be improving as of recently, I'd say you got yourself a winner, as evident by the game's absolutely ridiculous sales numbers. I remember it being like 8 million in 3 days or something. Crazy. And if you haven't played a Monster Hunter game before, the smoothing down of a lot of the core systems made the game feel a little simple to me, but I can't deny that it is by far the easiest jumping in point for newcomers, and that is always a good thing in my opinion, because Monster Hunter fucking rules, and everyone should be playing it. Wanderstop is a project a bit smaller in scope than a lot of the bigger hitters on this list, a collaboration between a lot of indie veterans, Davey Redden, Carla Zimonja, and C418, and I'll tell you, it's not going to be something that everyone is going to enjoy. It is uncompromisingly committed to exploring its themes, the major one being the experience of burnout, and it has a lot to say about it, but it does so through the lens of a character experiencing that exact feeling. Despite what it may look like, it is not your typical cozy game, and it's not really fun in the same way that you might think. But man, when it comes to delivering on its message, I can't think of a game recently that has spoken stronger to something that affects so many of our lives in the fast-paced rat race we find ourselves in. Not for everyone, but it might be for you. Definitely was for me. With a title as fucking ridiculous as Pirate Yakuza in Hawaii, you'd better believe there is some crazy shit happening in this game. Pirate Yakuza is about as RGG as it comes, mixing some absolutely gripping, character-focused melodrama with perhaps the most ridiculous premise for a Yakuza game yet. Goro Majima losing his memory and becoming an actual certifiable, bona fide pirate captain in Honolulu. What else can I say? Evidently a fair bit, as this is definitely one of my favourite RGG stories in recent memory, which I did not expect even slightly from what was marketed as little more than an off-year spin-off. It returned to the action combat of the classic games, but managed to do so in a way that was significantly more bombastic than usual, giving Majima the ability to switch between his two stances, one being the crowd-controlling dual sword-wielding pirate captain, making you fight up to 100 enemies at a time. It's crazy stuff. That, coupled with the side stories, and if you know RGG side content, it's exactly what you'd expect. From teaching your pirate crew corporate compliance to wingmanning for the ship's chef. Certified RGG all-timer, and it's canon. What the hell? Megabonk is the latest solo dev indie title to take the internet by storm, and for very good reason. Totally not made by famous YouTuber and game dev Danny Dev. The gist is, it's basically Vampire Survivors and all the hyper-addictive gambling adjacent nonsense that comes along with that, but in 3D. And just like Vampire Survivors or Balatro, Megabonk was my favorite of the productivity-destroying small-scale games I played this year. And if you've picked it up, it's immediately apparent why. There's just a level of ridiculousness to practically every single encounter in Megabonk, fighting off what can feel like hundreds of enemies at a time, and the ever-present chase of hitting a spot on the leaderboard, which I think is almost impossible at this point, given that basically every single run on the leaderboard is over 24 hours long. I think that's a testament, however, to how sophisticated the endgame experience is, considering that by every metric, the game is pretty simple otherwise. This is definitely one of those games that will ruin your life though, but I love it regardless. If you ever had a crippling Balatro addiction, definitely approach with caution. Like what I assume is a decent chunk of the audience watching videos like this, I grew up playing point-and-click games. I'm talking stuff like Machinarium, and I love the newer Telltale games like The Walking Dead. These kinds of games really feel like a product of the time in which they were developed, and I mean that in a good way. You might not have heard of this one, but The Drifter is one of the most unique experiences I've had in recent memory, combining that classic point-and-click formula with some razor-sharp pacing and some really well-executed time loop elements thrown in there. It's a camp 70s thriller from Australian indie dev Powerhoof, and you can really tell that it was made by Australians. I'm not going to say this is one of the best written games I've ever played, but to be honest, the writing works incredibly well for what it's trying to do, and did leave me shocked at some plot twists on more than one occasion. Overall, it just has this vibe to it that matches so well with those classic point-and-click games, but in the same way, it does feel like a modern video game, and for that, I fully recommend it. I really enjoyed my time with it. What can I even say about Blueprints? Last year, I talked about one of the most competent puzzlers of the year called Lorelei and the Laser Eyes, and a key pillar of that game was that it was so fucking hard that you basically always had to have a pen and paper on you and be ready to take notes about basically anything and everything. Blueprints is like, what if we took that exact level of intricacy and depth and made it a roguelike? You know me, I love roguelikes, and Blueprints definitely scratches that one more run itch in more ways than one as you progressively build out a mansion based on preset tiles, uncovering mysteries along the way. The story is also quite compelling. There are a lot of moments that leave you questioning what you think you know, and overall, if you like puzzle games, this is definitely one of the best of the year. And in the nature of games like this, I don't want to spoil too much, but just know I can't really recommend this more highly. I'll be honest, when I was writing the script for this video, I was like, wait, Split Fiction came out this year? It feels like it's been forever since I played it, and I don't mean that in a bad way. It's a testament to how strong the fundamentals of this game are, because I remember so many of its moments really fondly. Hazelight really are the goats of the modern co-op game, and just like It Takes Two before it, Split Fiction absolutely nails the fun factor with a much heavier emphasis on interesting gameplay scenarios that build on top of previously introduced mechanics. There were so many times where I was just in absolute awe of the new mechanics introduced, focusing much more on cooperation with your partner than It Takes Two did typically. And that's not even mentioning the absolutely bonkers final encounter. I'm not going to spoil it if you haven't played it, but honest to God, this is a contender for one of the greatest video game levels of all time, and the game is worth playing just for that alone. But it doesn't hurt that the whole game is also excellent. The story might not hit as hard as It Takes Two, but the gameplay improvements more than make up for it. Overall, Split Fiction is one of the most imaginative games I've ever played. The only issue is that you need a friend to play it with. I'm just going to briefly preface this one by mentioning the initial controversy surrounding this game and its use of what 11-bit claims are placeholder assets created with generative AI. Look, I'm broadly against the use of generative AI in basically any capacity when it comes to art, but as we've learned recently, there's a couple of games much higher up on this list that are very likely using it at least in some capacity. So, in light of that, I think The Alters has got it where it counts, and I'm going to treat it as such, but it is something to keep in mind. In any case, I really enjoyed it, and still, all these months later, it is one of my favorite games that I played this year. It neatly wraps 11-bit strategy and resource management experience together, and turns it into an actually really compelling narrative with legitimate character drama. I mean, as much as you could expect from a spaceship full of clones of the same person. What I like the most about The Alters is that writing and its willingness to engage with moral philosophy on a level that I don't think games typically try to tackle. It's hard enough to grasp on its own, but to weave it into an interactive story, super compelling. And that's not to say the rest of the game isn't great also. It is a very competent base builder and resource management sim outside of its story, with some really well executed third-person exploration sections. Overall, The Alters is a great package and definitely worth your time, despite some minor qualms over their undisclosed use of generative AI. Just keep it in mind, but still, I had a great time with it, and I think that's worth something. Okay, for the top 5, I'm going to go a little more in depth with these because I have a lot to say. So here we go. Look, it is no secret that I am a massive Kojima fanboy, and that Death Stranding 2 was pretty likely my most anticipated game before its release back in June. Following what was a pretty hostile reception to the original, a game that I am very fond of, I was infinitely curious as to what Kojima would do differently this time around. Death Stranding was always slow and methodical. It was quirky, but absolutely packed to the brim with character, and still, to this day, fucking Uber Eats Simulator is one of my favorite games of all time. I think that Death Stranding 2 then is a better video game than the original in almost every way, but in that, it feels a little less avant-garde than the first did, but to me, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Almost everything about Death Stranding 2 is bigger, better, there's more flexibility in the gameplay, the story is grander and better paced, and its strand-type systems are far more fleshed out this time around. The absolute scale and scope of this game almost make the original feel small in a way, with Australia's many highways becoming a massive community resource sink that I thoroughly enjoyed helping to build. What I think was most impressive to me about Death Stranding 2, however, was its uncompromising commitment to developing its sandbox, giving you any and all opportunity to play the game exactly how you wanted to play it. If you wanted that tense and arduous journey that the original offered you, it was absolutely there, but if you wanted to use all the tools at your disposal, zip lines, guns, and the game's many vehicles, it can be a lot less punishing than the first game, and I think that's the major reason to why it performed so well, with both critics and the general audience feeling a lot more favourable to it than they might have been with the original. I still will say that the narrative is probably not as airtight as the first game, but it does cast a much broader net, tackling issues like generative AI, wink wink, the control that corporations and social media have on every aspect of our existence, and how to deal with grief in a world that is constantly changing. It is a fascinating look into the mind of Kojima, and because of that, it was one of the best games I played this year, no doubt in my mind. Out of every game on this list, I think Dispatch surprised me the most. As I mentioned earlier, I am a massive fan of the old Telltale narrative games, and I was absolutely devastated when the studio shut down back in 2018. That style of game, an episodic, narrative-driven adventure, was a hallmark of the 2010s, and it feels like for the past 7 years or so, nothing was able to step in and fill that gap, and the genre felt like it died with the studio. So to say that Dispatch, all these years later, is my favorite Telltale-style game ever, I'm pretty fucking pleased about it. While it is a little smaller in scope than something like a season of The Walking Dead, that scale allowed Ad Hoc to be much more precise in their focus, placing a heavy emphasis on themes and character development, but doing so through some rather unconventional means. The decision to set Dispatch in an office of all places actually does a lot when it comes to the relatability of its superpowered cast, as they bicker over lunch, and the strength of those characters really makes you forget that Dispatch has very little actual gameplay outside of the intermittent shifts of Robert working on the SDN's computer and some QuickTime events. Perhaps the strongest part of Dispatch, however, is its really excellent writing, telling a story that is as consistent in its themes as it is funny, heartbreaking, and properly endearing. I've got a lot more to say about this one, but I'm going to save that for a video I'm planning to publish early next year. Just know, Dispatch fucking rules. If you'd have told me that the weird environment-smashing Donkey Kong game that was announced back in April that looked like an actual prototype was going to be this high up on my Game of the Year list, I'd have thought you were actually insane. Of course, between its initial reveal and release, we did learn a lot more about exactly what the premise was, and as Nintendo EPD does best, they've honestly made one of the most inspired and inventive 3D platformers in recent history, genuinely making some meaningful innovation that impacts how you interact with the world at large. The ability to smash basically everything might initially seem like a gimmick, but Nintendo, as they often do, knew just how good Kyle Wall Punching Simulator felt and developed that into the core conceit of the whole game, while still channeling that classic collectathon energy. And its level design is entirely conducive to that very premise. The enemies, smash. The NPCs, smash. An entire building, smash. The big elephant, smash. Wait, what? And to combine all that smashing with a story that is actually really solid, with some good voice acting, interesting characters, and some genuinely hype moments that Nintendo is always really good at, Donkey Kong Bonanza is a total winner, with some surprises that, if you know very well, were completely out of left field, and I will not spoil them. Just know that if you've got a Switch 2, or you were planning on getting one, please do not sleep on Donkey Kong Bonanza. I know it looks goofy as hell, but really, this is the system-selling game that Nintendo always trots out, and it would be an absolute shame to miss out on this one. It is as good as Super Mario Odyssey, and I really, really mean that. Every once in a while, a game comes along that just shouldn't exist. Whether it comes from a really small team, or was made by people that don't really have a lot of experience in making games, or an insane combination of many, many different factors, sometimes magic does happen, and that is absolutely the case with Clair Obscur Expedition 33. I remember seeing a trailer for the game back in 2024 and thinking to myself, that does look pretty cool, but how is a JRPG coming out of a French studio gonna go? As we now know, despite nearly impossible odds, Expedition 33 shook the industry to its very core, defying any and all expectations and coming out as not just one of the best games of 2025, but one of the most unique JRPGs ever made. You always hear people talking about how they can't do turn-based combat and that they don't like JRPGs, but there is just something about this game that completely flips that script on its head, and Expedition 33's parry system makes this feel like one of the most active turn-based games I think I've ever played, and also provides a level of challenge and genuine mastery that kept me hooked from the start. And the music, holy shit. Lorien Testard, having never published a single piece of music commercially before and writing one of the most eclectic and interesting scores in any game, with banger after banger after banger, there are so many stories about this game's development that just seem impossible when you say them out loud. And ay caramba, the story, such an affecting and poignant piece about the nature of grief, affectionately written by another unpublished individual, Jennifer Svedberg Yen. I think this game genuinely has the best narrative of the year, an absolute triumph of people with genuine passion for their art form, and it really does show. Look, I could keep yapping on endlessly about Expedition 33, but I know that you already know how good it is. It won Game of the Year at the Game Awards, along with basically every other award that it was nominated for. It is undoubtedly this year's indie darling, but with production value rivaling studios many times Sandfall's size. It really is spectacular and could easily sit at number 1 on this list, given its astounding quality. But to me, there was one game that absolutely blew me away this year, and I think you already know what it is. Despite my love of narrative, of emotionally resonant stories that can act as a portal into the minds of their creators and tell us something about the world and about ourselves, I really do love multiplayer games, and Arc Raiders has absolutely grabbed hold of me and it won't let go. Seriously, I put about 100 hours into it in 2.5 weeks when it launched, and while my addiction is definitely not as bad now, I'm still logging into it almost every single day, and that says a lot. I hadn't really played an extraction shooter before this point. I understood the conceit, but I'd only dipped my toes into something like Hunt Showdown, but it's safe to say that Arc Raiders challenged almost every preconception I had about the genre, and spawned so many fantastic memories that I won't soon forget as a result of it. And I think it mainly stems from the incredible community that's formed around this game. I have heard so many horror stories from Tarkov players about bringing their best gear into a run only to be sniped from halfway across the map when trying to extract. And don't get me wrong, rats definitely still exist here, and I have definitely had some absolute rage-inducing moments, but I would describe my experience as mostly really positive, especially in the first few weeks post-launch, with community members rallying around common objectives like the Queen and the Matriarch, and genuinely showing compassion when there is little incentive in the game to do so. Each and every map is distinct and densely packed, but the real star of the show are the Ark, their ferocity and intelligence being the cornerstone for every player encounter, creating a very real us versus them attitude when approaching combat encounters. The variety of enemies, the way they move, the sounds that you can hear all the way across the map when a large unit has spawned. Arc Raiders just oozes atmosphere, and I think that might be my favorite part about it. Yes, there is PvP, and the constant threat of other players adds this heightened tension to almost every encounter. But if you're smart, if you're friendly, a lot of the time you can avoid it almost entirely and form some genuine connections with those around you through a smartly executed use of proximity chat. Honestly, I think the decision to have a solo queue was likely the best decision that Embark could have made, as diplomacy is always an easier option when you're making decisions on your lonesome, and in my mind, it's a hell of a lot more fun that way. Everything about the game just exudes quality. The weapon design, the enemies, the environments. Arc Raiders is just an absolute all-timer, and honestly, I think it'll be a mainstay in the multiplayer shooter space over the coming years, despite the niche nature of the extraction loop. It was my favorite game of 2025, and I'm keen to play a hell of a lot more of it in the future. And that's a wrap. Honestly, there were so many good games this year that even this long list was kinda difficult to nail down. I know. KCD2 and Silksong are both conspicuously absent from this list, but man, I just didn't have time. I definitely plan on getting to them eventually. It will be good to have some time over the break to really dig into them. Overall, I think this was a really strong year for video games, and by the looks of it, next year isn't going to be a quiet one either. So, I want to hear from you. What was your favorite game of this year? Anything I missed on this list despite the obvious? Leave a comment down below. I'm keen to hear what you guys have to say. And in that, thank you for a great 2025. I couldn't have done this without you guys. Let's do it all again next year. Anyway, I hope you're enjoying the holidays. I'll see you guys soon.